because I suspect that when they voted this last November for a very charismatic new president, who happens to also be African American, a great historical moment, they did not know that they were electing someone who would appoint judges who would rewrite the law as if, and the Constitution as if they were there in 1776. I suspect when the American people voted in November, they did not understand that this president favored the view of the living Constitution. And it's unfortunate that no one raised it to their attention, because he actually wrote about it in his last book, dedicated an entire chapter to judicial selection. That has to be a first among American presidential candidates. And yet the opposing candidate thought that perhaps it was below us, that he should talk about it, except perhaps in one speech that John McCain gave in May of 2008 in Wake Forest University. Might as well have been in Tahiti on the day of the Democratic primary in North Carolina when he gave it. And no other mention. And so the American people didn't know that they were basically giving up their constitutional stewardship over the Constitution to judges who would be super legislators. They did know a bunch of other things too. They probably did know that they were giving up the fundamental, the first civil right that we are endowed with in Article 6 of the Constitution, that you shall not impose religious tests in public office, in nominations and appointments to public office. Because I can bet you that this president will not nominate to any court a faithful Baptist or a faithful Catholic, in keeping with the teachings of the Church, or any number of other people who have views about marriage or about life emanating from their faith. He won't nominate those people. It won't happen. We clearly saw in the last go-round that Democrats, even in the Senate, would do anything to stop such people from serving on the court, and did. And so the American people didn't understand who they were voting for or what they were voting for. And so now we're in a situation where Democrats will do what Democrats, are paid to do: get their man's nominee through. They will not be able, they are incapable of mirroring what conservatives did with regard to Harriet Miers when they told the president of their own party, including Republican senators, when they told a president of their own party that they could not support in good conscience the president's nominee to the Supreme Court. That will never be seen on the left, and the president gave them a really good nominee from their perspective. So their job is to get that nominee confirmed. And so, in my view, it comes down to Republicans. Even though in the minority, in a very small minority, it is up to them to engage in this teaching moment, as Senator Sessions has now repeated. It is important that they do everything possible to engage the American people by using everything at their disposal to bring the issues to the fore in the way that they were not brought to the fore in a campaign, in the way that most people don't get an opportunity to think about them at the fore. That's what Republicans have to do. Democrats, if they were true to their oath, would engage in that debate, stand up for their positions, and let the chips, as has recently been said, let the chips land where they may. But they too are trying to rush this nomination through, because at the end of the day, they benefited from not having any of these issues debated. They benefit from the lack of sunlight on these issues. And so now we're at a tipping point. The truth is that next week is the tipping point. If Republicans do not hear from the American people next week that they care and that they want this debate to be a great debate, they will likely come back and, with the exception of the hearings, which will be very well orchestrated, maneuvered, and worked, with the exception of the moment of the hearings, this nominee will be confirmed before the August recess, and probably with 2 or 3 days of floor debate. And my guess is that Republicans will divvy up the vote and be 24 and 20 against. They will not have understood the great opportunity that they've been given, as I think Curt pointed out, that this is the first opportunity, really, given what we now have seen of the Breyer and Ginsburg confirmations, that this is a great opportunity to debate the nominee of a Democratic president. And it doesn't involve distortion. It can involve disagreement over what is said and not said in her rulings. But it certainly is all about the president who nominated her. And one final thing. Actually, I mentioned it already, the idea of being Hispanic. That should not be a cause for pause for anybody to engage in this debate. I'd like to think that that's not the way Hispanics think. I'd like to think that we can go beyond that. There are some who will think that, oh, because she's Hispanic, perhaps should be given a pass. Well, I share, as an American, and secondly as a Hispanic, in the momentous, inspirational idea of having a Hispanic rise to the Supreme Court. It's not my priority, as I've said, but I share in it. And that is why I fought vigorously for Miguel Estrada, who President Bush was inclined to nominate to the Supreme Court, and who, as Curt pointed out, who Democrats treated like a dog. And that is what we should remind people. If someone dares to play the Hispanic card in this nomination, and remind them also that if a wise Latina woman has experiences that somehow trump the experiences of a white man, well, do they also trump the experiences of a black man? Where do we stop the game? And how far do we sink that court, which is the model, what's the word? Well, let me describe the word. Let me not say the word. I took 30 members of the Iraq and Kurdistan bars, the boards of the bars, to meet Chief Justice Roberts. And we had some very ornery people, some very angry people throughout the week that they were here in Washington. I got to know them very well. I knew some of them already. And the most ornery of them, a Shia from a very war-torn neighborhood outside of Baghdad, who had been very difficult. When he sat in that court and he had Roberts in front of him, he stood up and said, Mr. Chief Justice, this is the greatest moment of my life. And that is the awe that people have for our Constitution, our rule of law, our system of justice. And we do it in injustice when we somehow treat it as we would treat the Democratic National Convention and establish quotas for who sits on it, or suggest that we need to somehow politicize it and favor justices who will basically approach the matter, any matter, with a personal bias, a political inclination, and even personal background.